Here we are, we've finished testing the two vehicles. We had the Colorado 7 wagon on first, and then we followed that with Simon's red ute. We had powers from about 117 to 119 kilowatts. What we did was run after run, just single power runs usually don't tell you a lot.
Just done the first dyno run. Car's come up reasonably well. Obviously after sustained heat loads you can see power dropping off and air-fuel ratio starting to really richen up. Shows a lack of performance of the intercooler. Even in these cold conditions today you can still see it heat soaking really badly.
And then towards the end there I just did a steady state run for maybe 2 or 3 minutes of fairly heavy load on the engine with no dyno fan. In effect getting everything nice and warm so we could get a bit of heat soak in.
Heat soak is the heat that builds up in the intercooler can't be dissipated by the intercooler simply because of the surface area or the performance of the intercooler. So on a really hot day, you're going to see power dropping off even more dramatically than it was today.
Things are getting warm. We're on a cold day here in Berrima. We haven't been towing in a 40-degree heat for 4 or 5 hours. So they're the sorts of considerations when you're a specialist in your field, you take into consideration when you're tuning these things. And we know these vehicles are going to be tested in those sorts of conditions. That's why Simon's here today, getting this sort of work done so that we can be sure that everything will work in those conditions for sustained loads and still be quite safe for the engine. It's about right. So pretty much we've done a good comparison with a standard Colorado in a lot of ways, and of course an already highly modified Colorado ute. Now if we look at when people come into us, they come in for diagnostics, they've lost their fuel economy and all sorts of things. If we start looking at these graphs we can see why. So here's two graphs. The red graph is the ute, the lower one, because it's got the big tyres and all the accessories on. And the top graph of course was the Colorado 7 wagon. Now it's pretty dramatic. We're starting off with 91 kilowatts in the Colorado 7. If we move our graph over to the starting of the ute, we're only 79, barely 80. So we were well over 10, 12, 14% nearly power difference just there. But I think the big one is if we come over to torque, we had the same starting engine speeds. It was about 1700 revs or so. We're about 780 newton meters torque, and yet we're struggling to have 642 newton meters out of the ute with the big tyres. So we've got to remember these vehicles are probably pretty comparable, even if there's a bit of difference just between them because of the engine. You can't get a mistake there. That is a huge torque difference, and that'll make the difference when you're pulling out of a boat ramp, you're trying to get off the mark with a caravan. It's those sorts of areas. Once you get going, everything starts to pull a little bit closer together. But it really shows you that when you put those accessories on, bigger tyres in particular, it's not the fault of the tyre, it's just something you should be aware of. And I think if you're aware of what your modifications do, then you can understand how you can either deal with it or how you can modify your vehicle, which is obviously what we're doing here at the moment. So we'll be looking at these baseline graphs here. The ute will be a good one because we'll be able to try and see if we can even get it with these mods back up to where the vehicle is running with all those mods on, if it can go back towards a standard vehicle. Now that sounds pretty hopeless. I've added thousands of dollars worth of accessories to get my vehicle back to its standard form, but you've got to remember there's been a lot of weight, big tyre sizes, those very simple things actually chew very heavily into power. They also chew very heavily into fuel economy, because if we're going up a hill and we need 700 newton meters of torque to get up there, well, if we go and look at this graph here, we'll easily do it in the Colorado 7. That's foot flat, so I can take the foot off and we'll get up the hill. But if we're in the ute and we need 700 to get up that hill, I'm foot flat and I still don't have enough. So all of a sudden, there's where our economy comes in. So you've just got to be aware, and if you're aware and educated in these mods and what they do to your vehicle, then I think you have a much better understanding to either cop it and just take it as it is, or do something about it, which again is what we're doing here. Alright, if we have a look at these three graphs here, if we look at the red and the green, ignore the top one, I'll actually just get rid of that. Here's the Colorado ute, Standard is the red graph, the green is with the DP chip in there. Okay, we've certainly gained some power. We've gained about 10, 11 kilowatts. Probably gets a little bit bigger as we go up in the rev range. Even starting, not too bad. It's only 5 kilowatts, 6 kilowatts difference. But if it's standard 80, that's again getting towards even just 10% down there. So it's a nice power gain right through the graph. That's good. How does it equate in this discussion that we're in at the moment? I'll pull back in the Colorado 7. So if we pull the Colorado 7 back in here, all of a sudden we've now seen the peak power with the chip in at about 117 kilowatts. The peak power of the Colorado 7, about 118 kilowatts. So the chip, I guess you could say, has neutralised in some ways all those modifications. So we haven't got a hot tune in it. I don't want to do that because when we were doing testing, we can already see that we're richening the mixture up. So we want to keep things safe. We could probably go a lot more power with the chip. Let's have a look at that later on today, once we get the exhaust done and once we get Dave's intercooler system on. And if you go back here and look at the real power terms, you can probably see that, you know, that's offset. And I'm sure all the mods we do in some way, shape or form will go towards offsetting those bigger tyres. And look, really they're the culprit. We can't blame the tyre makers. It's just the fact we need these big tyres and we need the heavy off-road tyres for our travels across Australia. So again, as long as you're aware of it, you can deal with it. If you can't, it's another story. Probably if we just come back over to here for 1 second, that 700 newton metre hill that I talked about to get up it, we're getting closer with the chip in. Probably still foot flat, but we're getting more work done. So, you know, again, let's see what happens later on today once we get these other accessories on.